Thanks for jumping on the Explorer Poet podcast with me.
It's great to be here with you, Josh. Thanks for inviting me on, man.
Yeah, I appreciate it. You are the co-founder and management of a group called the Authentic Revolution, with a mission to create a more connected and empathetic world. So I just want to jump right into that. What is the Authentic Revolution? How did it come about?
The Authentic Revolution is a couple of things. The Authentic Revolution itself, I think, astride the organization, is a push toward a practice called authentic relating, which is bringing more depth, true connection, and real authenticity into the relationships that we have, both in our personal lives and the lives that we hold otherwhere in the world, like our work and our institutional connections. Authentic Revolution as a company does the best that it can to create best-in-class trainings, resources, and offerings for the world and how to communicate and connect better with the people around you. My stated mission inside of the organization is really to combat loneliness and polarization. And I've dedicated the better part of the last 6 years of my life full time to doing exactly that.
Okay, awesome. Go ahead.
So Authentic Revolution was kind of born out of my partner Sarah's love for practices that revolved around the Integral Institution, which was based in Boulder, Colorado before it shut down. And authentic relating games kind of were born out of T group and circling and other associated practices that were taught there. And Sarah spent the better part of the last 10 years popularizing those games and founding communities around the world that are related to them. She originally compiled, and now we've recompiled and published both print and online versions of a manual called the Authentic Relating Games Manual that documents about 250 variations of different interpersonal games that people can use to enliven connections in their life.
Okay, awesome. There's a lot of words in there. There's a lot of like vocabulary to go back over and figure out, which I'm excited for. Real quick though, I don't know if I caught it. What was the institution in Colorado I guess it's no longer there, but what was it called?
It was called the Integral Center.
The Integral Center. Okay. I want to go back and hit a bunch of these different topics: depth, connection, authenticity. You brought up loneliness as something that you're interested in, loneliness and polarization. So maybe the place to start is just your own personal interest in all these topics. Like, what is it that drew you to this? And then now as you're an entrepreneurial in this space. So as like a business and as something that you're trying to bring to the world, it's obvious that you have a passion for it. And if you didn't have a passion for it, you wouldn't keep pushing and pushing to do this. So what is it that connects you with this idea of authenticity and connection and communication? Like, what is the core of it for you?
There are a couple of places that really inspire me. I think I had a lot of loneliness in my life. I think from a third-party perspective, so like from the third story of my life, I think most people would have externally reported that I was like a really connected and social individual, highly extroverted for most of my life, or at least it appeared that way. And I grew community and organization and relationships anywhere I went. I had the privilege of finding myself in leadership and management positions really early on. So I started working with teams. I started coaching when I was still a teenager in both sports and film and audio production. So it looked like I was really connected, and I kept finding myself feeling really lonely. Not isolated. These two things are different, and the meters on the two things are different. But I was missing something, and I didn't know quite what it was. And I think I was probably already in my 20s when I started running into groups that looked more like support groups. And I didn't like how much I enjoyed the time that I spent there. It felt like kind of like gross. Have you seen Fight Club, the movie Fight Club?
I love Fight Club, yeah.
Okay, so there's this really wonderful part of the movie that's kind of a subchapter of it, but the text of it is really thematically poignant. And Brad Pitt and Helena Bonham Carter have started going to these support groups, right? And they get addicted to going to the support groups. In fact, they start like crafting and like mining territories for themselves in the support groups so that they don't find other tourists in the support groups. And it was kind of like that. I started finding myself attracted to spaces where people were forced into positions of vulnerability, sharing deeper cuts about their lives and the things that really mattered to them. And often those were places in their lives where they were disempowered or they felt a lot of challenge. And I didn't understand why until later, but I can track back to looking at even my high school experience and finding myself really, really enjoying communities, despite the fact that I was in sports and I was part of the popular clubs. I really enjoyed the time that I spent with my theater friends more, and formed deeper and longer standing relationships as I traveled and moved high school to high school and on to college. And so in my later 20s, when I was in leadership positions in hospitality and manufacturing, I started incorporating some things that I'd found from the authentic relating communities. I started incorporating games into our workflows. I started incorporating sentence prompts into our management meetings. And in the events that I designed as part of my production company, I started gamifying some of the introductory experiences. When people came through the door, they got asked questions, they were handed question cards that they were supposed to trade with other people at the event. My performers would ask questions of the audience, and we would train our MCs to do the same thing, to create these environments where people were sharing aspects of themselves that felt almost taboo, right? They're not things that you share in polite conversation, but they're the things that actually bond us to other people. So I think that the passion that I had for this came twofold. One was from an internal sense of loneliness and isolation that I felt, and the second was rather professional. I found that the teams that I introduced connection practices and authentic relating practices to gelled better, performed way, way outperformed their contemporaries. And the employees on the teams themselves found higher satisfaction and fulfillment in their jobs. They grew better as leaders, just developmentally, they were far more successful. And the average length of term of my employees on those teams as a result rose. So I found it in the wild. And I found it in myself before I had words to put to it. And when I saw the impact that had in my life and the social lives for the art events and the immersive event experiences that I was producing, and then coupled that with the professional performance that I had inside of my work environments, I just became deeply passionate about it. So when I left the manufacturing industry and I really looked at all of the many, many things I'd done throughout the course of my professional career, the things that underpinned them and married them together, the thing I found I was most passionate about was human connection. And so I champion it.
Yeah, it's really cool that you were able to find it in the wild. It was almost like you experienced this thing. Well, it's almost as if we all do this, right? Where we have this track we think we're supposed to go down, particularly from a professional perspective, or, in a family environment, in a sports environment. There's like these roles that you think you're supposed to play. And oftentimes we go down that track and it can leave us feeling pretty, I don't know, like you were saying, from an outside perspective, everybody thinks that you're doing fantastic, and they see you as this extroverted person who's excelling. But it's cool that you were able to go experience that along the track and then recognize that, oh, there is a different path, and then go for that. I really, I connect with that a lot, because I also have I have like an accounting background, a corporate background, and I was just doing a lot of things because I didn't know what else to do. But in a similar way, conversation, eventually I discovered conversation, and it's really why I do the podcast, is because what you're talking about from people saying things that are taboo, things that are a little too vulnerable for just your like regular, even amongst some family and friends, it's like, you can't be so vulnerable. And to me, I just really enjoy that connection, like being able to hear somebody say something that they've actually thought about. It's interesting also that you bring up this idea of extroversion, everybody thinking you're an extrovert. There's like this, and I've talked a little bit about this on the podcast, but there's like this pop culture version of what introversion and extroversion are. And everybody thinks that it's like, you either like being with people or you don't like being with people. And, or something about like socializing gives you energy or socializing drains your energy. And I think that I read a lot of Carl Jung, who's the guy who actually coined the phrase introversion, extraversion. And it's not that at all. It's just about how you relate to the world. Do you relate to the world through outer objects or through the subject, which is you? And so it's the filter. And so I had a similar experience, like going through the corporate world, where once I would meet a lot of people, work on teams, and just do my job basically. And then, if we have I have a lunch with somebody, I've known them for months, and we go out to lunch once, and I say to them no, I'm an introvert. And they go, what? Like, what? But you actually have an ability to talk to people. And it's just a misreading of what the actual definition of the term is. It's like the going pop culture version of the term. But I think it's really cool that you were able to find that passion and then actually convert it into something that you do. Everybody's got to make money. And so obviously it's cool that you can turn it into something that's monetary, but also it's just that what you get to fill your days with, what you get to do on a day-to-day basis.
I love that. And I love your obvious fascination with words.
My what?
Your obvious fascination with words.
Yeah, well, if you go to my website, that's basically it. I love words. And so I try to do three things. Like what I want to do the rest of my life is three things, which is read, write, and have conversations. And it's just it's a way to explore the world and make sense of it in a way.
I agree. I spend most of my time doing pretty much those three things. If you add in, one-sided conversations and a little bit of didactic lecturing, that's most of how I spend my time. And then creating the systems that are requisite to do that at scale. Yeah. So I appreciate it. I come from a background, I was an avid poet and a performing poet for many years. So I have a deep love of words. Yeah,
as do I. Speaking of words, let's go back to some of them that you use. So you talked about depth, and you talked about connection, and you talked about authenticity. Maybe let's start with authenticity. What is authenticity? How do you become an authentic person? Or what, if we can define authenticity, then what's the value of being authentic?
I like the logical approach to that. I'm taking a moment to meditate on this because I have a lot of different answers to that question. Authenticity, despite its multisyllabic frame, has kind of become a four-letter word societally. What does authenticity mean? Well, it's context dependent, like pretty much any four-letter word is. To me, is probably the easiest way to explain this, I think. We'll take the introvert stance on it. I think that authenticity is a personal responsibility. And I think this for a number of different reasons. The largest of which is that if you're going to live integrously in the world, you have to know what your internal frame is at any given time. To live authentically isn't simply to be blunt or to weaponize your truth. And I see that thing happening a lot. Like, oh, I'm just living into my authenticity. I'm like, yes, well, living into your authenticity can externally process a lot of different ways. If you're weaponizing your truth and you're doing so with intent, you're creating aggression and violence into the world in a way, and you can take that authenticity and you can live into it differently. And it's your responsibility to know how it's informed and what your motivations are. To live authentically, or to engage in a practice of authenticity, is really to be mindful on multiple levels, I think, of your internal frame. And that requires a lot of personal work, right? It requires identifying your core values, your ethics, your morals. It means being in touch with where you are emotionally at any given moment and expanding your emotional vocabulary such that you can describe the nuances of that ongoing flood, ebb, and tide of emotional frames. How sometimes the emotions that you're feeling are competing with one another, or they can feel like they're paradoxical. To know what you're feeling personally. And if you want to expand into a somatic or an energetic frame, some people prefer to interpret their lives and their authentic selves through both energetic and somatic frames. I tend to be a more emotional and logical person. To deepen your own vocabulary and ability to isolate how you're feeling somatic at the moment, what the energetics of a situation feel like, and then harnessing that and being able to communicate that to another person and translate that into your motivations, your personal action, and your ways of doing and being in the world. I think that being authentic can come in two kind of packages. One is the way that you walk in the world, and that could be, you could almost look at that as karma yoga, right? Is you're living with a dedication to being in integrity with your internal lens and your frame at all times, right? That's living through the world in a sense of karma yoga. It's a perpetual practice. It's all the time. And then there's being authentic in your leadership, or being authentic in your communication, or being authentic in is the primary lens here. It's the preposition to what comes next, which is being authentic, not just in your way of being, but your way of doing interpersonally with other people in relationship with the world. And so really allowing those motivations, your personal frame, your emotion, and your values and ethics to bleed through into the way that you're engaging with anything in your life. And at the core of it, I think that that's what living into authenticity means. And I think that the easiest way to practice that thing is in relationship. It's an interpersonal and transpersonal relation. So there are core sets of skills that are requisite to do that thing, right? To practice it. And I think that the frameworks that we offer intend to do that thing. And we've actually been leaning farther and farther into work with conflict, because we see, as we look out into the world, that polarization and loneliness and isolation increase when people are conflict avoidant. And relational depth levels out into a shallow pond when we aren't willing to be authentic about our own feelings with another person, be authentic about our own values, our own opinions, our own stances and positions on issues with another person, for fear that we're going to be in conflict with theirs. Where realistically, that's where growth happens, right? People have become less and less resilient to discomfort. And we've started equating, I think, psychological safety with psychological comfort. And so we're not willing to walk into the gym anymore, right? We go into a gym because a gym is a safe place to experience discomfort in a productive way. So we're trying to reintroduce people to exercises and frameworks and for workout routines that can help us to increase our resilience and grow the muscles that are necessary to live in a more transparent, vulnerable, and authentic way.
Wow, that's no, it's a good answer. There's a lot there. Just starting from the very beginning, what you're saying about being able to turn inward, to see your own framework, I think the phrase you were using was somatic, or being able to feel what's in your body, be present with it. Mm-hmm. But it's really interesting because what you're also talking about is being aware of that, but not imposing that on the outer world. And so like there's this, I guess this delicate line you have to walk with authenticity, where you need to really know who you are, and you need to let that govern how you behave. But at the same time, it needs to be deeper than, I'm feeling angry right now, so I'm going to behave angrily towards people. It's like you have to know yourself well enough to pull back. I think what you were saying was like external, like an external manifestation, but the word I would use is like projection. You need to stop projecting your inner self outward. And if you can calm that inner self, then the relation with the outer world becomes much better. Because, well, for one, if you're aware of yourself on the inside, you start to see that everybody else is having a similar experience to you, whether they're able to see their inner self or not. Everybody's going through the same experience where we have to interact with the outer world. And that's the next part of that authenticity that I hear you talking about is that interaction and how you go about it. It's a delicate balance, because if authenticity is practiced in relationships, it's almost a paradox. But being an adult, like paradox is where we live. Where what I mean by that is that we have to be ourselves, we have to be individualized, but at the same time, there's no point in being that individualized self if you can't exist with other people, whether it's, on a psychological plane or a biological plane or whatever, emotions, economics. We exist in this world where we need other people. And so there's this like push and pull between who you are and how you need to relate with others. But I think you're right. If you can get deep down into yourself enough to really understand what you value and see how you frame the world, you could start to see all of your experiences as your responsibility. And I think that's actually a really important kind of grown-up way to approach it.
I think in Jungian archetypes, we would say that we have to pass through the magician on our way to the king. Right? You have to be able, the person with the most power in any given situation is the one with the most options. And if you don't have the option of responding, you can only react. And that is base instinct. The world has entrained you to be a reactionary person. It takes all of your experiences and it asks you to react to any given situation in a default way. Being aware of your inner landscape and doing the work of mindfulness and bridging into and toward something that looks like an authentic manifestation that's a combination of your worldly experiences and the values it's engendered to you, and taking that default reactionary tendency and affording yourself more and more options over time through the practices of resilience and authenticity leaves you in a more powerful position. I think that there's this common lens that to be vulnerable is two things happen here. I'm going to start with the one. To be vulnerable is to be at risk, right? You have to be at risk for damage if you're going to be vulnerable. It's the definition of the word, and in truth, it's what the thing means. The practice of vulnerability and being vulnerable with other people is being vulnerable long enough that there is no vulnerability left. There's only intimacy. And I think that when people that have practiced this thing long enough, they tend to say, well, I'm being vulnerable with you right now. That thing, again, like so many other things, can be weaponized. Like the thing that is vulnerable for me is not the thing that is vulnerable for you. And the thing that looks like it's vulnerable in me to you is not necessarily. There are very things that you have with all of your power to hurt me with. I've spent so much time in vulnerability and a study of my own vulnerabilities that I can be deeply intimate with most people I walk into and with in my life without actually being vulnerable. There's nothing that they have to hurt me with anymore. There's a level of resilience that I have because I have practiced vulnerability, because I have practiced authentic connection. And that's a very, very powerful thing. The second is that vulnerability in itself, again, can be weaponized, right? We get into a thing, and to call back to this poor analogy that I'm running into, but I'm just going to keep rolling with it. In Fight Club, you get into these groups sometimes where I call them either the vulnerability or the victim Olympics. And it's like the most powerful person in the room is the one with the deepest victimhood or can display the highest degree of vulnerability. And you get into this relationship in group situations, but also in interpersonal relationships sometimes where who can be more vulnerable, right? The person that can be most vulnerable wins. And that thing oftentimes isn't useful everywhere. And so when we use that word, when we're walking into corporate America or we're walking into what I would tend to call more masculine forward relational contexts, vulnerability means all of the touchy-feely things. It's much more expanded than that. Vulnerability doesn't necessarily have to do anything with emotion. It's simply sharing things that could potentially put you at risk. And if you've done that work at a person-to-person level, you've done that work at an emotional level, you've done that work in thinking about your own motivations, your values, and your own integrity. When you walk into a work relationship and you've practiced that thing with a team, you can get far more transparent about your own motivations, the reason you think the things that you think, and start working toward interpersonal risk-taking in a very productive way, which is why I think that these practices really do translate really well. This is something that we talk about that's called the emotional vulnerability dial, or just the vulnerability dial. The same level of vulnerability isn't useful in all contexts. So again, knowing how to turn that vulnerability dial up or down to the level of utility and transparency and interpersonal risk-taking is really useful. That thing only comes with practice.
Help me understand when you say the person who's being the most vulnerable in the room wins. Help me clarify that for me a little bit. Do you mean in kind of this kind of emotional weaponizing game, or do you mean from the perspective of somebody who's actually capable of doing it, who's been there, where it's not like competitive, but they just have the ability to have more options, I guess, like you're saying? Is that how I should be hearing it?
Both of those things I think can be true, actually. In the context that I was using it, I was talking about weaponizing emotions or weaponizing vulnerability. And we would have to have another conversation about performative or claimed status inside of groups or relationships to really context this thing, which is its whole own lecture series. But I'm trying to provide a really specific example of this that would work to any audience, and I'm having a hard time with it.
Well, I think you answered the question, because I was just unsure if you were saying this was a positive use of vulnerability or a negative. Because if you're in an environment where there's a lot of emotional immaturity, then being vulnerable if you're playing the victim card, you can win a lot playing the victim card. But if you're in an environment where the status game is different, it's more, you're more rewarded for being emotionally mature, or for, like, maybe it's more of a meritocracy where you're rewarded more for producing something of actual value, then obviously being vulnerable in the sense that you're not weaponizing it, but it becomes a strength because, as you were saying, people can't hurt you. I could see it going both ways, but I was just trying to understand which way you were going with it.
A knife is a tool.
Yeah. 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 Man, so much here. So just going back to, you brought up Jungian archetypes, but then you've also brought up Fight Club a number of times. And what I do at this point, when I watch a movie, when I read a book, I hear a story, I've read so much myth and so much analysis of myth and so much depth psychology or Jungian psychology that I can't now watch a story, like a movie or a story. I can't see all these characters without just imagining them as archetypes that exist within me. So I see, like, the whole movie as, this is a little bit of an aside, but I just see, for example, Fight Club, I see the entire movie as actually taking place inside of one psyche. And so these are all characters, all the characters are actually just different components of one person. And when you talk about this work of vulnerability, authenticity, I see it as that, where you could see it as something that takes place in individuals, but on a grand, like on a more grand level or a grand scheme, it's something that the entire species, or like the entire human entity, needs to be taking part in, because each of us, in a sense, are those characters for this bigger thing that's taking place. But I think that I guess another way to say this is, like, with what you know about your own individual self and how you've seen the dynamics with people in groups work out, I'm curious, when you look into the broader world and you see, like, the bigger picture of the way things are geopolitically, with governments, militaries, economics, I imagine that you have this. I imagine that there's a lot of there could be some frustration there, some pain, but you probably also see, like, that there is a path forward through all of this. Am I don't know, am I wrong in thinking that?
No. In fact, I would go so far as to say there's only a path forward. There's no path back. There are only paths forward. And I think, just like in any given situation, there is the default path forward and there are considered options for response. I think that most of us, myself included, at most times in my life, are responding on autopilot. And we are often force ourselves into a lens of false dilemmas and false dichotomies, where we're presented with two options because two is the minimum number to create a sense of security and free will. And so we present ourselves with many dichotomous options, these branching roads that only head this direction or this direction, when in reality there are a multitude of ways to respond to a given situation. But if we want an idea of free will, there's either left or right, there's either forward or back, there's either yes or no. Where in reality, if we look within ourselves, most of the time the answer is something more like maybe, or no to either one of those. I refute that those are the only ways forward, those are the only options that we have. if I'm looking at the global scale and the impact that I'm trying to make, my stated objective in the world right now is combating loneliness and polarization. There are many wars, there are many battles to fight. Many of them are very worthy of people that are far more skilled than myself to combat them. One thing that I am uniquely positioned to combat is loneliness, self-isolation, and polarization. And I believe that the best way to do that thing is by engineering our environments, our interactions, and our workflows and group processes to center around human connection again. It's something that we've lost, and it's something that we're missing, and it is having an unseen global impact on both psychological and physical health outcomes, and takes a massive toll yearly, if you want to look at it from this direction, on human productivity. It's doing horrible things, and we see the result of that in many different places. We could look at the civil rights movement. We could look at the civil justice movement here in the United States. Internationally, we could look at globalized politics about like, hey, you're either for or you're against, right? We've allowed all of this horribly false logic to enter into the global decision-making machine. And I think that the only way that we get past that type of polarization is by talking with, and Malcolm Gladwell says this, he has a whole book on it, talking with strangers. We need to talk to strangers a lot more. We need to talk to people that disagree with us a lot more. And we need to be vulnerable. And we need to be open about our motivations with those strangers, because it is very, very, very easy in a world of 8 billion people to dehumanize the 99.999% of them that you will never meet. Right. And it's easy to stereotype. It's easy to look at a movie, for instance, or it's easy to look out into the world and create stereotypes that are simply projections of your own internal family systems. And I think IFS is a wonderful lens to marry with Jungian psychology. I think there is a way forward, because there's only the way forward. There's only the next step. And I think that each and every one of us have the opportunity to make a difference. And I believe that in a very, very real way. There are over 8 billion of us now. We can either allow the system to make our choices and frame our decisions for us, or we can educate ourselves on both our internal and psychological motivating factors to the point that we have more options for response. Or we can move forward in the way the world is sculpting us to. I think that we need to talk to strangers more often. And I think that not just the world, but the survival of the human species really hinges on us opening cross-cultural dialogues, of us expanding our idea of self, and really doing the best that we can to curb this ongoing internal motivation to see every other person in the world as self as other, right? As just a reflection of ourselves, because we're all so much more than that. Saunder's become an overused word, but it's beautiful, right? Every single person that you pass contains a multitude. They're their own little universe of contradictions, of motivations, a whole life story of trespasses and victimhood and survivorship. And I think that it's a very easy thing to dehumanize people, generalize them, and stereotype them, because we are engines of doing that thing. And it's very, very useful. And we need to remember that it's also incorrect. It's just less wrong than closing ourselves off. So I think the way forward, the way toward a better future to me, is to stop cannibalizing our social justice and our civil rights initiatives, to stop allowing ourselves to surrender to the false dilemmas and dichotomies that are presented to us by international and militaristically interested institutions, and to start thinking more rationally and more relationally. And that requires talking to strangers. That requires self-knowledge.
Yeah, especially in the world that we find ourselves today, where the opportunity to connect or to have those conversations has never been greater. But I think this takes me all the way back to the beginning of our conversation, where I was asking you about your passion and, you know, what it is that connects you to this movement or these ideas. And I think it's a beautiful place you've arrived. Like, I'm not saying that your life, the challenge isn't there, that there's not work, but just the very fact that you've aligned yourself with this thing, this idea that connects you to the greater whole, even though, there's 8 billion of us. So like you'll get your one little place, your one little thing that you get to do. Like fantastic that you found it. And I think you're spot on as far as communication, as far as viewing other people, not as the other, but as just another. We're all humans, and we're all having this same experience where we all need safety, we all need security, we all need connection, we all need status, we all need these things. And what we find more and more is that we don't actually have to compete for them. We can actually give them to each other and share in a way that everybody can be lifted up. I think you touched on this a little bit when you were talking about paths, forward, backwards, left, right, whatever it is. But I wonder if you could just dwell on polarization a little bit more. I think you might have touched on it, but just to speak more directly to this idea, your definition of polarization, and why do we, especially, why do we struggle with it, like on a global level, but more close to home? Why do we struggle with it, with polarization as individuals, and what does it end up doing to us?
Josh, what's something that you feel really strongly about as being right?
Man, I grew up in a religious household, and so I used to feel much, much stronger about being right about things. Nowadays, I feel much more, maybe not. I've given up much more of this idea of being right about things. But here's one that I probably do connect with pretty strongly. I homeschool my children because one thing I feel right about is that public education is not actually good for children. Okay. So I'll throw that out there.
Do you feel like that's universally true?
I don't think it's universally true. To narrow it down, maybe I could say, like, in the Western world, or even in America, or even just in the schools that I had my children in before, I just did not feel like they were beneficial to the development. And let me say it this way. Maybe instead of saying it's not good for them, I'll even define it more. I'll say it doesn't seem like public education is focused on the development of individuals, which I think is what this world needs at this point, is people to become their whole selves. I think it's more focused on producing people who can be slid into any kind of economic situation as far as a metric of productivity. So cogs in a system or something like that. So I think that public education is not healthy from the perspective of developing whole human beings. And it is more focused on some larger kind of collective agenda of maintaining an economy.
So you'd say that the public schools are designed to help students inherit a collectivist attitude. And you think that it's really important to raise your children as individualists. Do you believe that individualism is inherently better, Josh?
I found it comes down to the way that we're going to define the terms, but yes, I do think it is better when we're trying to create individuals who behave in a sense where they're not all about me, all about greed, all about, when there is, I believe that there needs to be some sense of collectivism, but I don't believe that, I believe it should lean more towards the individual and less towards the collective, yes.
So you think that if you have the privilege to homeschool your own children, and you believe that they should have an inherent sense of individual self-worth and self-determinism, that they should be homeschooled?
Yeah, I believe that if I have the ability to, I should, yeah.
So let's just take for granted that, not all parents have the option of homeschooling their own children. You live in a privileged enough situation that you have the ability to do that thing, both because of your education and the amount of time that you're able to dedicate to that and fostering your children's education. So let's say that instead of public schools being based the way that they are, on a false meritocracy, what if all schools instead were privatized? And the funds that we currently allocate to the public school system were instead to go to private school systems, and they were all smaller schools, and the curriculum was consensually or democratically developed by the parent bodies. Do you think that that would be a better way to move us forward? Take away the monetary constraints and think about it both ethically and philosophically.
It's a hard one because the entire country was educated in public schools. And so part of the challenge with changing the way that it's done is that it may, even though we change the management, we change the curriculum, whatever it may be, there's still going to be, it's hard to change the idea of what school is and what school is supposed to do. So I think that it has the possibility of moving towards something that's more in line with what I'm thinking, but I have no idea. I see a lot of people having tried charter schools. I see a lot of even looking at local private schools. In a lot of sense, or in a real sense, some of them are just clones of the public education system. So it's hard to say if that's the direction it would take us.
Okay, so you did a fantastic job resisting that assault. Thank you.
Yeah, it seems like you just want me to say yes or no, and I can do that if it's more helpful for the conversation.
It's not. This is actually a really fantastic representation of how you avoid polarization, which is by bringing in wider context and framework and continuing to reject the false frames that are presented to you. And I think that if you or anybody else involved themselves with special interest groups of homeschooled parents that then began talking about how the merits of homeschooling far outweigh the risks of allowing your children into public schools, you find yourself in an echo chamber. And that echo chamber no longer has a way back. There's only a way forward. Once you've decided that homeschooling is best, there is only deeper and deeper into the minutia of homeschooling, right? And as you go deeper and deeper down the path of like, how radical is this thing? How far of a departure do we need to take from classical educational structures? All of a sudden, we find ourselves in no man's land that didn't exist before the echo chamber started moving us farther and farther and farther in a more and more either liberal or conservative direction. And we think of it on a scale of liberal to conservative, like how far back toward traditional education or even farther reformed can traditional education become an authoritarian perspective, and how hyper individualistic can we make homeschooling to serve our children, our children's needs, and the world that we want them to foster themselves, both internally and in the world around them, as force multipliers of the education providing them. This thing happens on every topic.
Yeah.
So if we're talking about, so are you pro-war or do you hate America?
That's one that's pretty common these days, and it's a pretty frustrating one if you want to have a nuanced view of the world, I would say.
It's poor rhetoric, but it's all and false logic, and it's a very polarizing viewpoint. Many political systems around the world that are democratic base themselves on two-party systems, and that is inherently polarizing, right? You only have two parties that are representing a multitude of different issues. Those parties are never going to directly represent the people, their constituent bases, because they have diverse opinions that usually will fall under the headings of each one of these two platforms, but they have to support one or the other, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, no, like I was saying, if we get back to the root of decision making, the first decision that we make is yes or no. It's right or wrong. It's dichotomous. And so if we just surrender ourselves to the yes, no decision tree over time, we're going to just find ourselves farther and farther in one direction or another. And most people are not going to move back toward a dichotomous center, right? They're going to branch out farther and farther and farther in one direction or another. And we end up very, very polarized in absolutely any issue that can be of public contention or an echo chamber can be created around. Because there are so many people in the world, there are upsides and downsides to the amount of people that we have to connect with. Right? It's very easy to connect with people of like-minded views. And all of the media that we consume is geared toward affirming the way that we look at the world because it makes us feel good. Right? So that's social media. That's any inherent media that you consume. That's the private media that you consume. That's the public media that you consume. Those are the news stories you're going to read. Those are the Medium posts that are going to show up on your timeline. Those are the Facebook and the Instagram and the TikTok videos that are going to show up on your timeline. And over time, the ones that are most interesting to you are the ones that are going to be more or less right or left of center. And you're just going to trend farther and farther in one direction. And you're only going to be in conversation with more and more people that think the same way. And the way that you continue to be interesting to that audience is to have slightly different views, which are usually trending in the same direction that you found yourself in from wherever your original center was. So we become more and more polarized by spending more and more time around people that are more and more like ourselves, as we sculpt ourselves to normalize these more and more radical ideas that are held by our sociocentric groups. And that's how polarization occurs. And it happens more and more as a result of the technological, socio-technological advancements that we've made more recently. But I mean, we could track this thing back to the invention of the Gutenberg press and what free media has actually done to us. What has happened? The invention of the public press is only a few hundred years old, right? Since the invention of the public press, we created more record of human interaction and existence and thought and philosophy than had been created in the 100,000 years prior. And since the advent of the internet, we've created more information. We create more information in a 2-day cycle than we did in all of human existence before the advent of the open internet. That's how much information that we generate. And that information is generated by special interest groups primarily, things that are worth talking about. And you only get access to the things that you search for. And the more that you search for them, the more oriented you are toward things that affirm your viewpoint in the world. Right? So polarization isn't just like, it's not just a weakness of mind. It's, again, available options. You have to go searching for things that disagree with you. And most people don't do that. If they're trying to support a hypothesis that they have about the way that the world works, are guns good, are guns bad? You know, we should have access to automatic weapons. Why should we have access to automatic weapons? They're going to be taken to studies and they're going to be taken to theories if they even care to, verse themselves with this scholastic material and scientific research-based evidence for their argument. They're only going to find the fors and not the against. So polarization is a slippery slope that we all find ourselves on all the time. And it is quite literally a Sisyphean battle. Like, it is uphill every day, all the time, to not allow yourself to become deeply polarized. I am polarized on the issue of human connection. I think that human connection, and I think that talking to strangers, and I think that transparency and vulnerability about my motivations, my backing material, the science behind the claims that I make is really, really important. It is the best way to be in connection and relation with other human beings. I have negotiator friends that deeply disagree with me. I have very, very successful, billion-dollar net worth individuals in my life that deeply disagree with me, and some of them that totally do.
Yeah, it's first of all, I think you did a fantastic job of demonstrating polarization, and just through example, but then also just through talking, through your definitions and your descriptions, and very good. You said that this goes back. I think you're just talking about the media thing. It goes all the way back to Gutenberg and the printing press. The way I see this polarization thing, it goes so far back. Essentially, it's where it's most documented, or like that first story that documents it is the beginning of the axial age, the age we're still in. There's this myth of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. And we live in a Western world where we accepted that myth. The Eastern world, they accepted the Buddha myth. And so they went different, even there, right? We've got a polarization. But in the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve, the tree that was given to them was the tree of good and evil. And so by partaking of that, it set I'm not talking about this in a literal sense, but from a myth perspective, it set our whole Western world, the three, Abrahamic religions, on this path of just constantly looking for what's good and getting rid of what's bad. And at this point in history, it doesn't really matter what your religion is. We all still have this tendency. I like to think that, at least from a political perspective, I like to think that I'm pretty central or centric, because I really disagree with both polarizations. And then talking with somebody like you, I go, okay, yeah, Geof, he seems to really understand this thing, and he's probably not getting trapped in it as well. But even you yourself, you say, I'm polarized. And so I can see this authentic relating, this authentic revolution, learning how to be vulnerable, learning how to communicate. It really does seem like the path to avoid being polarized one way or the other. And I could see, that being the reason, one of the reasons I think that you do get passionate about it. But is that how you see it? Is that the path can you envision a world where more people are able to avoid the intense polarization around political ideas, religious ideas? Or is it something about our human nature that we will forever be stuck in this Sisyphus game?
Again, so many of these topics have so much to unpack here. I think that there's an inherent allure that is deeply human, and it actually traps back into loneliness and isolation and our inherent need for belonging. The more esoteric a group is, the more the belonging matters. The smaller the social circle, the more impactful the belonging. The larger the social sphere, the less the belonging is affirming to the individual, and their rightness and their goodness and their sense of social cohesion and support. So I think that we inherently search for places in our lives where we can feel a sense of belonging. And some people call this tribalism. You can call it whatever you want. But what we're looking for is a sense of affirmation and trust and loyalty and camaraderie. And that sense of belonging can happen amongst strangers and can happen amongst human beings that have very, very disparate values and ethical systems and stances and positions on socio-political, controversial socio-political viewpoints. And it doesn't most commonly, unless they have a married agenda, unless there is another ideology that outweighs all of those other things. So I am part of a number of groups that have memberships of vastly different political agendas, cultural narratives, geographic origins. And the stated objective of many of those groups is simply to connect. It's to experience a sense of connection and provide diverse viewpoints about the many, many disparate things that are happening in our world. That's the only point, right? That's the only stated goal. And every one of our members has a sense of belonging there because we're all working toward that goal together. The only way that we find ourselves in groups that are like that thing, that are such an odd conglomeration of disparate personalities and elements, is with a stated objective. And then we get ourselves into how do we develop communities, right? What does belonging mean? What is the art of gathering? And there's been a lot of beautiful work that's done on that I've been read, both available to the public in layman's terms in publication and also research and scientific evidenced articles and peer-reviewed work. So I think that inherent to the human experience is seeking out places to belong. And I think that oftentimes the check for being able to belong in many spaces is the acceptance of and extolling of shared values, morals, and what you were talking about earlier, shared mythos. The underpinning of civilization past what we call tribal units of Dunbar's number 150, which is not the reason that I use it, but it's easy to reference. Dunbar's number, which is 150, is the most number of people that you can have in a socially cohesive unit where all of the individuals kind of know each other. There's almost 11,000 connections, unique, disparate connections in a group of 150 people. that's really hard to even consider mathematically or relationally. But as soon as you get above 150, it becomes very hard to know everybody's names, know any real information about anybody there. So to trust anybody in a group of more than 150 people, there has to be a shared mythos, right? There has to be something we all agree on. And what you were talking about in terms of origin stories, right? Those origin stories are all created so that we have a sense of trust with people that we don't know, that we know believe in the same ethical, moral system and origin stories that we do. So that when we see another person wearing a cross in the world, we can think that person believes in an afterlife. And that person believes that the only way that you get into the better version of this afterlife is by following this moral code. So I can believe this person reasonably to act in this way when we see that person in the room, right? So in a world that is leaving traditional religion behind more and more every single year, we are seeking out mythological structures to believe in that we can trust each other to. And I think that polarization is a natural occurrence in those situations. But even if we track back to other religions that have done the same thing over time, the church gets large enough. And then what happens? It splits, right? There's a fraction of the church that now exists. And then what happens to that fraction of the church when it gets big enough? It splits again. And there's a splinter cell of that and a splinter cell of that till it's smaller and smaller enough that belonging matters again. So there's the collectivist and hyper-individualist orientation to mythos and belief structures. So I can be a Republican, but I'm a Republican that believes that life begins at conception and now I'm a part of a group that actually matters again, where I can feel that belonging is affirming to who I am as a person, and it's worth fighting to retain my membership of. And it's not just a trap, because it also contributes deeply to the subjective well-being of people that exist inside of those small groups. It's I can't call it paradoxical. It's not. They're just disparate ideas that exist simultaneously, right? Polarization is doing absolutely horrible things to our worlds because of how manipulable it makes us as a global population. And loneliness is doing horrible things to us because we're finding it harder and harder to deeply connect with people in our lives because of how polarized some of the groups need to be for us to feel like our sense of belonging matters. It's a dilemma. And my recommendation is to talk to more strangers.
Talk to more strangers.
Talk to more strangers.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we that hour went by really fast. And I was hoping to talk a little bit more about the authentic revolution. And, you know, you guys have this book, The Authentic Relating, and you have the Authentic Relating games. But I'm actually really glad that we went this route because you talked about your passions being this focus on isolation and polarization and how we can, I don't know what the word you would like to use is, combat or work against these natural, there's like this structural world that's making us more isolated, more conflict avoidant, but there's also this inherent nature inside of us that makes us polarized. And so whatever it is that's driving you or driving us to behave that way, seems like that's the thing that you focus on or that you'd like to focus on. And so I'm actually glad that we got to dive into it. Like, honestly, everything you're saying, it's very logically sound. You pull from all these different personal experiences, but also, you know, things that we've discovered about human psychology, human behavior, human biology. And so I'm glad that we went that way. We do have a couple more minutes. And so I did want to circle back around to kind of the actual organization and maybe just a little bit more about what you guys provide for people, both in interpersonal relationships, leadership relationships, and then, you know, just how people could get involved or find you guys and be part of this.
So Authentic Revolution provides a whole bunch of different services to the public. Thank you for bringing us back to this so I can at least plug my organization. And, if the hour went quickly for anybody that's watching, you can find us and learn more too. Authentic Revolution is available, and I'm sure that you'll include a link on this at authrev.org. We provide training in conflict. We provide training in deepening into mindfulness of your own authentic way of being and leveraging that to find your authentic ways of doing in the world, to follow your sense of aliveness and passion and personal motivation and responsibility, how to chase that thing out into the world, and live in a world that is constantly doing its best to erode your very personal internal value system. We, like I said, provide some work on conflict. So our Art of Difficult Conversations course is launching for the last time here in a couple of months. We will be fragmenting that out into some modules since most people are asking for focus work on conflict. So this fall, for instance, you'll start seeing things that have to do with what is power? Where does power live? What is resource power, authoritarian power? What is status? Right? What is status claimancy, performative status, and naturally occurring social status? How do these things play into our lives and our conflicts? What does it mean to be resilient? What does it mean to be resilient in conflict? How can we leverage the tools that were introduced originally by Carl Jung and have been evolved by us through Carl Rogers and many other client-centered psychologists and therapy modalities to approach conflict negotiation and mediation in ways that are less wrong, less harmful, and result in non-compromising resolutions? What does it mean to negotiate authentically? Is it even possible? We can talk about that because I do it. We provide a lot of consulting services as well. So we offer training for social health facilitators and authentic facilitators, people that want to take this work into their worlds, both personally. So if you want to foster communities that are oriented around these principles, these practices like authentic relating games, circling, T group, related modalities, we train people to facilitate both in their communities and inside of pre-existing organizations. We've worked with institutions to do that thing, including government organizations. We ran a really fantastic facilitation pod for the emergency responders for the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Association last year that was absolutely beautiful. So we do professional trainings and we train professionals both individually and in teams. We provide consulting services, again, to individuals and teams on interaction and experience design. So how do you design your workshops? How do you design your trainings? How do you design your L&D? How do you design your retreats or even your massive summits to leverage human interaction more fully and create more productive, cohesive, and creative environments in which to produce things in the world? How do you do the same thing at the social level or the governmental level? We provide consulting on all of those things. And then, of course, we also do conflict training work for organizations, teams, and leaders. And we provide mentorship. Sarah and myself personally provide mentorship for what I would call high change potential individuals. So people that are intentionally making large impacts in the world, either broadly or deeply, and are searching and seeking out mentorship to help them make pointed steps in the direction of changing their approach and their organizational approaches to culture, to conflict, to connection, and bringing back human-centric work designs and bringing more authenticity into their work lives, their personal friendship lives, and also their romantic relationships or family structures. So these are all things that we offer to the public. Like I said, the Art of Difficult Conversations is running for the last time in a couple of months, or starting next month. We've got a open to the public leadership training that's starting next month, which also will be getting remixed later this year. And we're really opening ourselves up for more consulting work by freeing up more of our training calendar and really pushing, I would say, evolving and developing more of our facilitators to take the lead spot in many of our trainings so that Sarah and I are more available to do this consultative work in the world. It's really where we find our passion.
Okay, well, awesome. Yeah, I mean, I think it's sorely needed in the world, both for people on a personal level, but also in the structured world, the business world, the educational world, the government, political world, everywhere. We need more of this. And to be honest, just sitting here listening to you talk for an hour, like I could have listened to you talk for 3 hours. That's just who I am. and the depth with which you can go into all of these topics that just off the cuff, these topics that we covered, to me, it seems like it's good evidence that if you guys can go into the same kind of depth on all these other topics that you offer through training, through consulting, that people should take advantage of it, and it would be good for the world. So again, Geof, I really appreciate this. This was fantastic. I had a great time, and I appreciate your time. Just want to leave with one quick quote here from Stephen Hawking. You've probably heard this one before, but it's one of my favorites. He says, "For millions of years, mankind lived just like the animals. Then something happened which unleashed the power of our imagination. We learned to talk and we learned to listen. Speech has allowed the communication of ideas, enabling human beings to work together to build the impossible. Mankind's greatest achievements have come about by talking, and its greatest failures by not talking. It doesn't have to be like this. Our greatest hopes could be reality in the future. With the technology at our disposal, the possibilities are unbounded. All we need to do is make sure we keep talking." So again, Geof, thanks for talking with me today. I appreciate it.